The one takeaway that I have, and a constant, is my admiration for the bravery and the loyalty of these men and women who fight in these wars. And on a larger scale, I think we, again and again in this country, proceed around the world and get engaged in conflicts without an adequate understanding of the world that we're entering or the culture that we're entering. It's gotten somewhat better, I think, but the world is not a simple place. And I wrote at the end of the book that you should beware of people who have theories that explain everything. You should run away from those people as fast as you can. You know, I respect people who approach the world with humility and with the understanding that that we need to learn before we move and before we risk these fine young lives in causes that we, in some cases, can't win or shouldn't have undertaken to begin with.
Mark, if President Trump were to call you up and say you've done a lot of work on war, and and he would say to you, I would like your thoughts and advice about what he should do. I mean, we've got a number of wars going on. We may have some new ones, God knows. What would you say to him?
Well, the first thing I would say is staff the State Department. I mean, I think that if you want to avoid war, you need to have these people who are educated, who live in countries around the world, who learn languages. This is their role in our government. And I think that it's just a disgrace that our State Department is underfunded, understaffed at this point. And I think this is a sure strategy for getting us involved in stupid wars around the world and for getting a lot of people, not just Americans, killed. So that's my first advice.
Okay, what would be the second and third? If you were to say that, he would likely say to you, would you like to work in the State Department?
If I felt I could help, I would. You know, I would solemnly advise him to leave and to go back to running his real estate business in New York. You know, I know Donald Trump. I spent a long weekend with him once years ago in Mar-a-Lago, a very long weekend. And, you know, he is one of the most loathsome people I've ever met. But at the time, he was harmless. Other than running his businesses into bankruptcy and defrauding people, he was not a danger to the greater world at large. He was mostly a risk to himself and to people who invested money in him. I'm, you know, utterly shocked, speechless that this man has been elected president of the United States.
But he has,
Yeah.
and you're not showing the humility that you were talking about before.
Well, I do know
Yeah.
him,
Yeah.
and I have met
Accept
other
that, yeah.
presidents,
Yeah.
and I don't, you know, my honest opinion is that this is not someone who measures up to the office.
But he's got the job, and suppose sincerely he said to you, I mean, this is the great we will watch about Trump, but there have been lots of words on things. The one thing he's articulated is a policy for Afghanistan, and a strategy which is reasonable. It's not off the charts. In fact, I've heard some Democrats say, "Gee, why didn't we think of that? Let's not talk about troop numbers and so forth."
Right.
So, as a gesture of goodwill and good faith, if he were to ask you in a practical sense what he should do because this, I mean, I go back to McNamara's point, that you ought to have anguish when you're making these decisions.
Right.
And if you talk to presidents about these decisions, as I know you have, they say this is the worst day or week of your life when you have to decide to send people into harm's way. So I wonder, is there intellectually something to say to Trump, or is this all, you know, irredeemable?
I don't have high hopes. But I would recommend that he talk to young Americans who've been serving in Afghanistan and Iraq. And I think he actually did some of this before he made that decision, no doubt at the urging of General Mattis. I place a lot of hope in the young generation of Americans who have been fighting in wars all over the world and have had a very practical education in the parts of the world where they've been based, and who have a real understanding from firsthand experience of war. I think, I'm looking for people to rise up from this generation to take positions of leadership in this country, to run for public office. I think they have a lot to offer. As far as President Trump is concerned, I would ask him to listen to people who have been there, who understand what they're talking about. Make a genuine effort to learn from them before you make these decisions.
And the war decisions a president as commander-in-chief makes are not just like kind of what's the tax rate going to be or how many people are here. I think those war decisions are when we decide as a country we're going to war here, we define ourselves to the world, and we, in many ways, maybe more important ways, define ourselves to ourselves. And that this is a giant decision that it's got to, and there's some hope that there was a process.
Yeah, he's
on
got some good
Afghanistan.
people around him.
Yeah, and if he did say the other night, he said, my first instinct was to pull out. And, it was no surprise to anyone when he said, I like to follow my instincts.
Right.
But then he said he did not in this case.
Right.
And so the education of reporters, we get to be educated all the time. Education of a president's very important.
I agree. And I think that education comes from the State Department, from the CIA, from the military. I would hope that he would take their counsel.
Yeah.
And that, I think it's really a tragedy that he has ignored, the State Department, which I think ought to be the eyes and ears of the United States around the world. That's how do we learn unless we send smart people to represent us around the world and listen and learn.